Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Uncanny X-Men number 150, cover dated October 1981. And this is a special double-sized issue for the 150th issue of the title, and it features the X-Men going up against their first and arch foe, Magneto. The last time that Magneto faced off against the X-Men was issues 112 to 113, drawn by John Byrne. This time around we get Dave Cockrum taking on the task of showing the X-Men versus Magneto. And in the foreground we have Aurora Storm cradling the limp, perhaps dead body of Kitty Pryde, aka Sprite, in her new Sprite costume. So pretty good cover by Dave Cockrum, nicely designed, eloquent. Let's open this one up to the first page. We get a good splash page here. The title of the story is I, Magneto. And here we have Magneto in, what would we say, classic Silver Age form, saying, I, Magneto, offer the people of the world a choice. You have 7 days to cede me total political control, or will end life on Earth as you know it. And what's interesting in this particular anniversary, well, it's not really an anniversary issue, but the 150th issue, is that Claremont radically reworks Magneto's character. We learn something about his backstory that we did not know prior to this issue. In the previous issue 149, Professor X was going through his files on Magneto, and one of the points he made was that they didn't know Magneto's origins. They didn't know what country he was from, what his backstory or history was. He was something of a mystery. And that's something that Claremont fills in significantly and for all time going forward in this particular issue towards the end of it. So the creative team is Chris Claremont, writer, Dave Cockrum and Josef Rubinstein, and Bob Wiacek credited as artists. So that means Cockrum is providing loose enough pencils on this that are getting finished by Rubinstein and Bob Wiacek. The letterers are Tom Ozakowski and Gene Simek, and the colorist is Glynis Wine. So let's continue. Something else I want to note about this splash page with Magneto is that is a very nicely drawn Magneto, nicely inked too, but it's very different. Cockrum isn't taking anything from Jack Kirby. There's nothing in Cockrum's style that draws at all on Kirby and that kind of classic Marvel style. You don't get the exaggerated twistings of anatomy or the splayed legs that you would get from Kirby. So Cockrum drawing on a different tradition of comics art in the course of his career and in the course of this particular issue. And Cockrum pretty good at likenesses too. So we've got the likeness of Ronald Reagan there in 1981, Margaret Thatcher, Downing Street, Brezhnev there in the Kremlin, and various other characters as Magneto delivers his Silver Age style speech, but with an interesting twist. So I'll read it out because it's significant for the coming story. He says, I'm a mutant homo superior possessing powers and abilities that set me apart and above common humanity. Because we are different, I and my fellow mutants have been hunted down and slain like wild animals. Those killings will stop. All killing will stop. The nuclear powers have the capability of expunging all life from the planet. Daily, the risk of such a holocaust increases, yet the leaders of those nations seem not to care. Indeed, some view nuclear war as inevitable. Some have the audacity to view such a conflict as desirable. You're welcome to exterminate yourselves if you wish, but in the process you might destroy my people as well. That I will not allow. Within the week, all the world's nations will initiate complete disarmament of their nuclear and conventional weaponry. Any state which refuses to comply with these terms will be destroyed. Any foolish enough to open hostilities with me will not survive to regret it. My terms are non-negotiable. This is an ultimatum. Ignore it at your peril. And then he ends his holographic transmission to the leaders, the global leaders. It's an interesting ultimatum he's given. It would result in world peace, but of course with Magneto as the political master of the globe. And he says to himself here in his soliloquy, every world leader from Reagan and Brezhnev down to the lowliest dictator heard that speech, beheld my holographic image. Most will consider it an elaborate hoax, but the great powers know me for who and what I am, the master of magnetism. They will take me seriously, being great and therefore proud, none will be inclined to yield without a fight. I may even be forced to demonstrate that I do have the power to crush them, even though I pray it will not come to that. In the end, though, they will surrender. And he removes his helmet, and he's got some champagne on ice there to celebrate. And in the background, though, you've got Scott Summers voicing some doubts. As usual, Magneto, you're celebrating before your victory's won. Suppose someone calls your bluff. So Magneto's fairly sanguine here, and he says, you should know me better than that, Cyclops. I do not bluff. And Lee Forster asks, why are you doing this? And he says, and this is interesting here, here we get something that goes far beyond any Silver Age characterization of Magneto. And this is Claremont pushing into the 1980s, developing and reconfiguring the characters away, continuing that reconfiguration of the characters away from the Silver Age style. Magneto says, the nations of the world spend over $1 trillion a year on armaments. I intend to deny them that indulgence. The money and energy devoted now to war will be turned instead to the eradication of hunger, disease, poverty. I offer a golden age, the like of which humanity has never imagined. So Magneto's goal is not to enslave Homo sapiens, but rather to create and bring about a golden age. So his intention is noble. He wants to end war, end conflict, bring about a golden age, solve the problems of hunger, disease, and poverty. Who could argue with that? But Cyclops puts the point to him, with mutants ruling the earth and you ruling the mutants. Is that so terrible a thing to contemplate? So Magneto is conceiving himself as an enlightened tyrant. And Lee asks the operative question, what about freedom? So what's he going to say to that? Let's continue with the story. This is what he says. He says, freedom, Ms. Forrester. There are more people starving today than there are those who can truly call themselves free. I offer peace and a good life, or a swift and terrible death. The choice is theirs. You can see Lee's hand up to her mouth in shock. That's really well done by Cockrum there. And Magneto continues and says, for myself, I am tired of seeing things as they are and asking why. Of dreaming of things that never were and asking why not. So he's quoting George Bernard Shaw there. I have the power to make my dreams reality, and that I shall do. So as I was saying, this is very 1980s. You know, we're coming up to the period that Alan Moore is going to be in works like Marvel Man, later called Miracle Man, and of course in Watchmen, asking questions, what would be the implications of super beings in our world? And this is Claremont pushing the conventions of the Silver Age supervillain, such as Magneto, into a more considered treatment, and giving Magneto that more noble intention. And it's very interesting. And of course, as I said, towards the end of this particular double-sided issue, we'll learn some interesting facts about Magneto's background that explains a little of his motivations here. And then this is an interesting little character bit too. Magneto questions Cyclops as to where's Jean Grey, because he thought that Jean Grey was the woman he loved. And what's he doing with Lee Forster? And Cyclops gives him the news. She died last year. Magneto doesn't know how. And then we get a little recap here. And it's interesting to see Cockrum drawing John Byrne panels. So he is reproducing those panels fairly faithfully, but you get that little modulation of the style. It's his style, but you can see the Byrne originals hiding beneath the way that he's drawn them. So Scott explains what happened with Dark Phoenix and On the Moon. And Magneto, maybe surprisingly to some readers, conveys his condolences. He says, I'm truly sorry. But Scott doesn't trust him. He's like, spare your hypocrisy, Magneto. And Magneto responds interestingly, she was an honourable foe, Cyclops, as are all the X-Men, worthy of respect. I cared for her. Interesting characterization by Claremont there. And then he continues, I grieve for her. I know something of grief. And here we are getting into that backstory, but hinting at it rather than giving it to us fully, as we'll get it later in the issue. Search throughout my homeland. Professor X made the point in the previous issue, didn't know what Magneto's homeland was. You will find none who bear my name. Mine was a large family, and it was slaughtered, without mercy, without remorse. So speak not to me of grief. Boy, you know not the meaning of the word. And then Magneto grabs his helmet, because his island and the citadel that he's within is under attack from nuclear missiles, warheads, flying directly at the island. And I really like the way that Claremont has rendered that, the flight path of those missiles launched by a submarine. So Magneto, with his helmet on, he's in his what would we say, like his he's ready for action when he wears that helmet. He uses his powers, of course, to stop those missiles easily. He modifies their trajectory ever so slightly so that they fall harmlessly into the ocean. But wearing the helmet there, indicative of his old style, Silver Age character, he decides to turn his attention to the vessel that launched the missiles and the fools who ordered that launch. So Cyclops protests, wants them let alone, but Magneto insists he'll show them the same mercy they intended for me. So now we pick up with that submarine, the Leningrad, and Claremont always remembers, in the future, this incident of Magneto sinking the ship, the submarine, and all aboard being crushed at less than 1,000 meters below the ocean. He'll pick up on that in the future in issue 200, of course, in 274, and for the last time in his original run in X-Men issue 1, Adjectiveless X-Men issue 1. And then he projects his holographic image of himself to the Kremlin in Moscow, and he tells the leaders there, "Behold, humans, the merest fraction of Magneto's power." And he picks a Soviet city, this one here, Varekino, if that's the correct pronunciation, and he manifests a volcano in the middle of the city, but Magneto deliberately retards the volcano's growth, allowing time for a ruthless, desperate mass evacuation of the city. His message is implicit and grim, but for his benevolence, the entire populace would have perished in their beds. So that's very interesting. So for the soldiers, he decides that they launched the missiles against him. They're fair game in war. He sinks that submarine, killing all aboard. But when it comes to the civilians in the Soviet city, he gives time for an evacuation of the city. He won't kill civilians, non-combatants. And so he says, "My next target, comrades, could well be Moscow. And if there is a next time, be assured that I will not be so merciful. Take heed, comrade Premier," that's Brezhnev, "you hold the lives of countless millions in your hands." So that's quite a cool opening to this particular issue. We see Magneto's plan for bringing peace on Earth, and also his level of power and the degree to which he's not to be trifled with, even by the world's superpowers. Sunset later that evening, Lee is sitting out on a dock looking out over the Caribbean Sea, and she's thinking to herself that she is powerless, that she has done, even though she's done nothing personally to harm Magneto or any mutant, it doesn't matter. I've never been hated like that. So she's picked up on Magneto's hatred for humankind, who have so menaced and killed and slaughtered mutants. So Scott goes out to find her, and she tells him her fears about what's going to happen to the world, to them. Scott says he doesn't know, and she determines that he's going to fight Magneto however he can, and he gives the reason here. Magneto's way is wrong. The peace he offers is illusory. His golden age will last until he dies, if that long, and it'll end as it began, in blood. So the two young lovers kiss, and overhead, unnoticed, as their embrace becomes a kiss, a jet soaring high above the island is enveloped in a corona of blinding magnetic energy. Neither Scott nor Lee look up, neither see it begin to fall. And I like this decision by Claremont not to open the issue with the X-Men getting aboard their Blackbird in New York and flying out to the Bermuda Triangle to try and locate Scott. Instead, that's all already happened. The aircraft is a specially modified version of the SR-71 Blackbird, the most advanced plane in the world. It belongs to the X-Men, but now it's falling from the sky into the sea. And aboard, this is a little bit of comedy here, but also kind of real life, Wolverine was going for a sandwich, so he's not strapped in. So when he emerges from the locker, he's loose in the cabin and knocks into the back of Storm's head. And with his adamantium skull, like his skeleton laced with adamantium, he knocks her out cold. So now they're on a dive into an uncontrolled dive into the sea, because Storm isn't there to slow and control the jet's dive. And as Nightcrawler says, without her, we haven't a chance. So this is really well done, the storytelling on this particular page by Cockrum. I like that rendering of Nightcrawler there. Also, he's using a zipatone there for the shading on one side of Nightcrawler's face. And I like that, the way that the Blackbird is going in upside down into the drink, so to speak. Let's get past the ads and continue with the story. So Kitty begs Storm to wake up. She does, just in time to control the Blackbird enough that it skates along, hops along once the sea surface, but then it bounces once before it sinks without a trace. And then we pick up with Professor X, and he's aboard this yacht out in the Caribbean, and he's lost telepathic contact with the X-Men. And Peter Corbeau, who is the skipper of the yacht, has lost radar contact with the Blackbird, and who's aboard as well, except for Moira MacTaggart and Carol Danvers. And the note here from Louise Simonson is that her connection with the X-Men now is explained in Avengers Annual number 10. So Avengers Annual number 10 must have just come out in advance of this particular issue. You can find my review of Avengers Annual number 10 here on the channel if you're interested. So Corbeau figures where they were, where they must have been flying, figures that maybe the Arcadia, Lee Forrester's ship, must have been out in that direction as well when it disappeared. Talks about the sea quakes, a rearrangement of the Earth's crust. This is all down to Magneto, his raising of his island from the bottom of the sea. There's an implication that that island has something to do with Atlantis, the ancient Atlantis. And yeah, they're out in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. So now we pick up with the Blackbird on the bottom of the sea, and I like the way that Cockrum has rendered that, the escaping air and also the coral reef here. So the X-Men emerge from a hatch, and they have with them breathing units for underwater. Obviously they had thought about the prospect of a sea landing and were prepared for that. But Colossus, who in his armored form doesn't need to breathe underwater, doesn't have his own, and then suddenly and unexpectedly he transforms back into his human self. He can't explain it, he can't turn back, his lungs are filling with water, he has no means of contacting the X-Men who are swimming up ahead of him and don't see him, so he starts passing out and drowning. And it's interesting who he thinks of as he passes out. He thinks of Storm, his sister, Kitty, my Katarina, so obviously implying there his romantic attachment to Kitty Pryde. And then it's Moonrise. This is a really nice page. I really like everything on this page. I like the spotting of blacks on this page. I like the way that Lee's diaphanous nightdress is rendered there as well, especially in this particular panel. It's so well done. Wonderful spotting of blacks. Great colours by Glenn Oliver on this particular page, implying the nighttime scene. Yeah, and the moonlight here cast inside the room, the bedroom that Lee and Scott are sharing. So they truly are lovers. And so she walks down to the sea and she's grabbed by a familiar gloved arm, and she's cast into the water there by this figure in shadow. We know who that is. Yes, of course, it is Wolverine. But I like the way that Cockrum has rendered Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler from Lee's perspective. She's never met them before, and they seem a little bit demonic and menacing and threatening in the way that they're rendered there. That's very well done. In any case, she recognizes their names because she's heard about them from Cyclops, and so she tells them, "I'm Lee Forrester," and look at the way she hesitates as well. Great characterization from Claremont, a friend of Scott Summers. So she's not quite prepared to identify the exact nature of their relationship as being romantic at this point. And of course, Colossus has been fished. The X-Men must have discovered that he wasn't keeping up with them. They've brought him up onto the dock there, and he's unconscious. So everybody's panicking, but Kitty knows mouth to mouth and CPR. So they work on Colossus, and he comes to. So Wolverine's delighted, of course. You gave it the old college try in dying, Petey, he said, but you blew it. He's being ironic. And then suddenly he catches a scent, a familiar scent. He says it here, it's real faint. The breeze is pushing it away from me. I can't quite get a handle on it. I think it's a guy. He knows how to move to and use cover. I can't see or hear him. I like the way that Cockrum has rendered Wolverine's hair from being wet in the seawater, how it's hanging down by the side of his head. And it's so different from the way that we're used to his hair up and dry. But it works. It's pretty cool looking. And then a finger taps on his shoulder, looking for me, short stuff. Who's this? So the reader's thinking, is it Magneto that he's smelt out? Or is it Cyclops? It's Cyclops, of course. And so we have a reunion. And of course, Nightcrawler spots that Cyclops isn't wearing his ruby quartz visor or spectacles. What's going on there? And then we get the explanation of the inhibitor field on the island. And that, of course, was why Colossus turned back human and why he nearly drowned and why all of the X-Men won't have access to their powers. But Cyclops thinks they still have a chance of taking on Magneto. He says, we all possess skills that have nothing to do with being mutants. I'm a strategist. Storm was a thief. Nightcrawler an acrobat. Wolverine has his claws. Colossus his natural strength. Kitty her intelligence. Magneto doesn't even know you're here. And even if he did, he'd believe us all to be helpless. He's in for a very big surprise. So the team strategist has a plan on how to thwart Magneto. So he splits the group into two. The men on the one hand, the women on the other. And the plan here is to destroy Magneto's key piece of equipment. And so we have the setup for that here. And then we're back to the towering central citadel, which is where Magneto's based. The women arrive there. They've got their plan. They go for the computer system. Kitty figures there's got to be a programming book. She finds it. But it's written in a foreign language and probably in code too. So she whispers to Storm, I can't understand a word. And that is interesting because, again, it implies something about Magneto's back history. What other language would he know than English? Then Storm makes her sneaky way using her the skills acquired when she was a beggar thief in Cairo to Magneto's bedroom, what turns out to be his bedroom. And this is interesting. So he's sleeping there naked and the helmet is there on his bedside table. And Storm thinks to herself, he's fast asleep. How ironically human. He looks so vulnerable and strangely at peace. I've never seen him like this. Why are we enemies? There's much to respect about him, almost to admire. What a shame, what a tragic waste. I could easily kill him. I should. Wolverine would, without hesitation. So she's facing an ethical question, a moral dilemma there. We know what Wolverine's move would be, but this is Storm now. And how's she going to manage this? So Magneto is a threat to the world, and she's got him sleeping, and she could do away with him, cut his throat, and that would be the end of him. But should she do it? Then we're back with the men, and they're working on this, as I said, like this key piece of equipment. So some teamwork here. Wolverine using his adamantium claws to cut these supports for the equipment. There's a little bit of a, what do we say, like there's a complication when he falls off the side of it as it begins to shudder from losing its supports. And then Nightcrawler leaps into action using his acrobatic skills and of course his tail as well to catch Wolverine before he falls over the side and throw him up to Colossus, who catches him. But he needs a hand up himself. So that's a nice little sequence there of Nightcrawler. And then we're back with Storm and her dilemma. So she thinks to herself here, for all his crimes, for all the pain and grief he's caused, Magneto is not in his heart an evil man. Given different circumstances, he could have been like us, or we like him. Interesting from Claremont, you know, this idea of nurture, not nature. Magneto, naturally, is not an evil man. It's his nurture, it's circumstances, it's what has happened to him in his life that has made him the person he is what's emerging from all of this. But Storm continues to think, yet Lee is quite correct. To fulfill his dreams, he would destroy us all without hesitation. The longer we remain, the greater becomes our risk. On that plate, a knife. With it, I can end the risk and the threat forever. It is a sharp knife. It could easily cut his throat. I know how. I've done it before, once as a child, to save my life. I did it then. Why not now? I swore an oath never to kill again, but Magneto is prepared to slay the entire world. This is great. So this isn't an action sequence. This is, as I said earlier, an ethical, moral dilemma. But there's great tension here, and very nicely laid out in the storytelling by Cockrum. Really, really well done. Seeing Storm here thinking out what to do, and Magneto fast asleep still. So she grabs the knife, and Magneto awakens. Someone's in the room. It's Storm standing beside me holding a knife, and he reacts with the speed of thought, creating a wall of magnetic force that hurls Storm across the room and out the window, a 1/4 mile above the ground. Now, of course, Storm doesn't have her powers, so is she going to be able to survive this? And this is a great little moment as well. At the same time, the metal mesh armoured fabric of his costume flows through the air like mercury as Magneto pulls it off its hanger and onto his body, the helmet too. And he thinks to himself, Aurora had a knife. She couldn't defend herself with her elemental powers because my inhibitor field has stripped her, as well as her mutant companions, of their mutant abilities. Not quite everyone though. We have the astral projection of Professor X, so now he attacks his old foe. Charles Xavier is the strongest mutant mind on Earth, but although Magneto has no psionic talent, his will is second to none, and he, like Xavier, is fighting for a cause he fervently believes in, a goal he will pay any price to achieve. So here's the physical body of Professor X out on the yacht. Carol Danvers is watching through her binoculars, and then suddenly the screws of the chair that he's sitting in begin to unscrew themselves, and a harness fastens around him. What's happening here? He is magnetically brought to the Citadel, while everyone on the yacht is subject to an electrical equipment short circuit, shocking all aboard into swift, brutal unconsciousness. So they're out of it. Carol and Moira can't do anything. They're unconscious, Peter Corbeau as well. But then, back on the island, the men are still working away at that central piece of equipment. Wolverine, with his adamantium claws, cuts the last brace that was holding it aloft. And it begins its fall. But who's there except for Magneto? And he has in his, he's captured Lee, Kitty Pryde, and Professor X. And he says to them, I commend you all for your ingenuity, your ability, your courage. Once more the X-Men have proven themselves the worthiest of foes. Regrettably, though you made a valiant effort, it was a wasted one. Behold. And then he uses his powers to grab the huge piece of equipment and fit it all back together again, as good as new. So the whole thing was for nothing in the end. And then he uses his magnetic powers to draw metal from the walls to bind the male X-Men. So now everyone is captured. And he, in answer to Kitty's question as what's happened to Storm, she asks him, you killed her? He says, I did, child, though it gave me no pleasure to do so. But she wasn't killed. She was hurled from his bedroom, and she was caught on her cape, caught on this projecting bit of a building. So she climbs up the cape using all her physical strength and saves herself. So Storm is out there free, and she goes straight to the computer control room and destroys the computer control system, thinking to herself, these explosions should draw Magneto up here to investigate. While he's occupied with that, I'll find and free the X-Men. And vow or no vow, if he's hurt my kitten in any way, we can fill in the blank there. And meanwhile, interesting development down here. Along with the computer systems goes the inhibitor field. So Cyclops begins to feel the return of his mutant power. And it's interesting the way that Claremont has him perceive it. My eyes, he thinks to himself, I felt this sensation, my brain on fire, feeling like it's being twisted inside out before, after my escape from Krakoa, in the seconds before my optic blasts were restored back in Giant Size X-Men #1. My power must be coming back. But Magneto doesn't know this. Cyclops thinks he's got one chance to catch Magneto off guard. He lets rip with an optic blast at Magneto. Then he unshackles himself from the metallic binding. And, this is funny, pops on a spare ruby quartz visor that the X-Men brought in their emergency pack. That's pretty good. And now we get this nice anchor image of the X-Men leaping into action towards Magneto. Of course, he fights back. Nightcrawler vanishes in a burst of flame. Where is he going to teleport to? Right behind Magneto with a metallic bar, knocks him in the back of the head and teleports away. So we get a nice action sequence here of Magneto versus the X-Men. And they've got their powers back because of the shorting out of the inhibitor field. This is an interesting panel here with Cyclops letting rip with his optic blast. A use of a color hole there, so we can see through the optic blast itself as well. Then we've got Storm arriving. She's got her elemental powers back. She attacks Magneto with, first of all, a lightning blast. That doesn't affect him because, as he says, your lightning strikes will not defeat me, Weather Witch. They only make me stronger as I absorb their energy. But then she counters with a tornado, and that causes him a little bit more difficulty. So he thinks here, my magnetic powers are anchoring me against the cyclone's pull, but the strain is incredible. Also, the whirlwind is creating a vacuum around me, impossible to breathe, only seconds to act. By the way, at this point, we're into the Gene Simek lettering, so not as good as Orzechowski's, and clearly different from Orzechowski's style on these remaining pages of the issue. And my guess would be we're also into the Bob Wiacek inking as well, different from, somewhat, slightly different from Josef Rubinstein's. So Magneto uses his powers to grab Colossus. Colossus, always vulnerable to Magneto's powers in particular, slams Colossus into the back of Storm and then begins to use him against the other X-Men. Professor X now using his telepathic powers to psionically attack Magneto. Wolverine here, this is a great panel, uses his adamantium claws to slash open Magneto's helmet. So the helmet's gone, and Magneto here is at bay against the combined powers and attack of the X-Men, but he's holding his own. Storm going up against him once again. And here in the background, Cyclops, master strategist, has a plan to defeat Magneto's ultimate goal and sends Kitty Pryde on a covert mission. So he says to her, Magneto has to align his energy projector with incredible precision. That requires absolutely accurate computations. The computers are the key, Sprite. Find them, destroy them, and he's out of business. Can you do it? And she says, I'm an X-Man, aren't I? So off she goes, phasing through the wall. Then we're back to the fight. Everybody teaming up against Magneto. Colossus getting a punch in there in his human form. And Magneto here under stress, under pressure. And this is great. I like that expression on his face. That's very well done by Cockrum. And he thinks to himself, they strike from all sides. I seem unable to defend myself. But why? My heart pounding. I cannot get a decent breath. Of course, the X-Men's direct attack on me is a diversion. The real threat comes from Storm. In the enclosed space of this chamber, she's been gradually reducing the air pressure, creating a partial vacuum. She no doubt hoped that by the time I realized what was happening, I'd be too weak to cope. So now, she strikes him again with a lightning bolt. He says he'll never surrender, and he's delighted here, magnificent. He's ecstatic. As a byproduct of her elemental assault, Storm created a hurricane about my island. It took all my remaining strength, but by warping magnetic fields within the Tempest, I was able to draw down lightning bolts from the sky, filtering them through Storm before absorbing their awesome power. I caught her by surprise. She was unable to compensate for the sudden energy surge. As a result, the lightning that rejuvenates me is destroying her. That's a very interesting and creatively thought out use of Magneto's powers by Claremont. Then we pick up with Sprite. So she's up in the wrecked control room and she's thinking, what part of Magneto's computer systems should she strike at? So she realizes, or she works out, that it should be the memory bank, because it's the key element of any computer. So she uses her power to phase into the machinery and disrupt the electromagnetic fields in order to wipe the memory banks of the computer systems. Then we pick up with Storm fighting against Magneto, and Colossus gets between, on Nightcrawler's orders, gets between Storm and Magneto, breaking the circuit, and then he teleports Storm out to sea in order to douse the flames that are actually burning. Her costume and her skin is even burning from the attack, but she's alive. That's a nice panel there with Storm gasping for breath in the water. Then we're back at the fight, and we're moving now to the crucial moment, to Claremont's radical revelation regarding Magneto's character history. So Magneto's becoming more and more enraged. He realizes that his computer system has been completely destroyed, that the work of a lifetime has been lost from the destroyed memory banks. And so he goes after Kitty, and he arrives and he's enraged. How dare you, he says. Kitty calls out for Storm, but she can't hear her. And Magneto says to Kitty, shouts at her, you X-Men are always there to oppose me. And in the narrative captions, we're told Kitty lunges forward, planning to escape harmlessly through him, but her phasing disrupts Magneto's natural electronic field, jolting him painfully, and Magneto ruthlessly responds, sending a lethal charge of electricity through her. Then his pain subsides and his shock at his behavior wrenches him out of the berserker rage that had possessed him. And then this is it. This is the moment of character transformation, a real unexpected moment with Magneto. So he comes to himself, comes back to his senses. She's a child, and Kitty's only 13 and a half at this point. And so he asks himself, what have I done? Why did you resist? Why did you not understand? Magda, my beloved wife, did not understand when she saw me use my powers. She ran away from me in terror. It did not matter that I was defending her, that I was avenging our murdered daughter. This is all new information for readers. I swore then that I would not rest till I created a world where my kind, mutants, could live free and safe and unafraid, where such as you, little one, could be happy. Instead, I've slain you. And that was his noble goal at the beginning, that there would be no more killing. But the irony is, he feels now he's slain this young mutant child. Storm arrives, of course. She is enraged. If you have a deity, butcher, pray to it. There's a misspelling there. As a boy, Magneto reveals, I believed. As a boy, I believed. As a boy, I turned my back on God forever. Kill me if you wish, Windrider. I will not stop you. Also, I just missed the key speech balloon here in this panel. I remember my own childhood, he says, the gas chambers at Auschwitz, the guards joking as they herded my family to their death. As our lives were nothing to them, so human lives became nothing to me. So this is it. This is the radical reconfiguration of Magneto as a character, in terms of why he does what he does. Why is he so invested in his mission to ensure that mutants are not mistreated by humans? It all goes back to his youth. It all goes back to his experience in the Nazi death camp of Auschwitz. So he continues with Storm. When she asks him, is this some kind of trick? He says, yes, only it is being played on me. I believe so much in my destiny, in my own personal vision, that I was prepared to pay any price, make any sacrifice to achieve it. But I forgot the innocents who would suffer in the process. Can you not appreciate the irony? He asked Storm. In my zeal to remake the world, I've become much like those I've always hated and despised. And Storm responds and says, the dream was good, is good. Only the dreamer has become corrupted. Magneto's response is, "It is too late to change. I'm too old. I've lived too long with my hatred." "So be it, Magneto," she says. "The choice is yours." "Give me my child," she says. And then that's it. Magneto disappears miraculously because she was phasing at the time. Kitty survived Magneto's energy blast. The other X-Men arrived to find her regaining consciousness in Storm's arms. Of Magneto, there was no sign. Professor Xavier scoured the island telepathically to no avail. Their arch foe had escaped. Strangely, though the X-Men were at first despondent over that, Xavier did not seem to mind. So Professor X telepathically must know of Magneto's change of heart, his conversion, so to speak, and that's why he is content to see Magneto free. He's confident that he's not going to return to his ways of old, and we will see that play out in the coming years in Claremont's ongoing development of Magneto's character arc, all the way to Adjectiveless X-Men issues 1 to 3. So then we have the aftermath. We have the X-Men on the island. The yacht is being repaired by Corbeau. They're enjoying their time on the beach at this point. We get a little bit of comedy on the very last page where Kitty pretends to use the Force to raise the Blackbird out of the sea, but actually it's Colossus in his armoured form who's found it and brought the Blackbird to the beach, and then they'll be able to work on it. The X-Men are not amused with a little trick, and they dump her in the drink. And that is the end of the issue. Coming up next, a shocking surprise awaits our heroes back in New York. Be here in 30 days as guest penciler Jim Sherman helps present X-Men -1. So obviously after a double-sized issue, Cockrum needs a break for a month. And so this artist Jim Sherman is going to fill in. Well, I do hope that you enjoyed my review and commentary on this very important issue in terms of Claremont's development of Magneto's character, the 150th issue of the X-Men. Let me know your thoughts on the issue itself, on the change of Magneto's character, the revelation of his back history, what you think about that in the comments below this video. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.